In this training video, I'm going to delve deeper into this whole concept of above and below the line behavior and really why it is so foundational to your own sales success moving forward. So just for a moment, let's just take a look at your current selling environment. And I recognize that today, more than ever, selling in this environment is a tough gig. If you take a look at the rapid change and continually shifting goalposts, added to the fact that you work in an environment where competition gets tougher every day and where your customer is more informed than ever before, the question that you have to ask yourself is, am I, as a professional salesperson, really at the top of my game? Do I have the capabilities to compete and win in this current environment? I mean, if we take a look at how technology has made it more difficult than ever before to get to speak to prospective buyers, and the fact that you have to now deal with and navigate your way through an absolute minefield of multiple decision makers where it just takes so long to get someone to make a decision. And then you add to the fact that in many respects your products lack true product differentiation, something that you can hang your hat on, something that you can set yourself apart from your competition with. On top of all of that, you now add to the mix that everyone you talk to is either on a limited budget or have no budget at all. And this really makes it a tough job to be out there selling today. So when you add all of these challenges, as well as continual product upgrades and increased revenue demands from your management, and the fact that, if we are really honest, we're using outdated sales techniques, is it any wonder that so often you just feel like you're just going round in circles, chasing your tail? The truth of the matter is, over the last 8 to 10 years, if we're really honest with ourselves, then let's acknowledge the truth that really, as salespeople, we really haven't had to go out and sell. Because just as in any boom market, many sales are not necessarily made because we were so good at selling, but all too often we happened to be at the right place at the right time and we just picked up the business. Our customers were really buying rather than us having to go out there and create sales. Sure, I've no doubt that there have been instances where you have gotten out there and manifested the business. But come on, let's be honest. In the majority of sales situations where sales were made, it was more a question of timing and good fortune than sales ability. How many sales did you actually make versus customers bought? The bare facts are that, in fact, over the last decade, many successful salespeople have found their success because of their willingness to be proactive and take action. And add to the fact that they probably hustled more than their peers or competitors. However, again, if we're really honest with ourselves, this emphasis, if you like, on action didn't necessarily make us good at selling. Rather, what it did was ensure that we were knocking on the door of opportunity more often. So now that we're in the cradle of a harsh economy where the easy sales have simply dried up, those few sales opportunities that are on the table are being snapped up by those salespeople who are skilled at the game of selling. Now, the good news is really that your competition are struggling with the exact same issues that you are. The bad news is that the future is not likely to get any easier. So one of the best places that you can begin your sales turnaround effort is to begin by turning around your own mindset and the way that you see things and the way that you do things. Selling is like a sport. It's like life. More often than not, it's a mental game where he or she who has the right headspace wins. I mean, you know this. You know that when you put your customers' needs before yourself, you do far better at selling. I mean, think about when you have to make a sale because you're chasing a number, you've got your manager on your back, you've got a budget you're trying to reach. When you're looking at your customer like they're your next car payment or your next mortgage payment, you put so much pressure on yourself, and as a result, that pressure just transfers to your customer, doesn't it? And typically what happens? Everything bombs. What about those times when you have all fear and angst about the meeting or the presentation or making the phone call? You know that very often it all kind of goes pear-shaped and downhill from there. And you know when you're in that zone, when you're just focused and you're just nailing it, you know that you can sell. So what do we know? We know that selling is really more about what goes on between our ears than really what comes out of our mouth. And really it starts with our willingness to take on self-responsibility and to behave in an above-the-line manner. It's a fundamental aspect of your role as a professional salesperson that you make self-responsibility and playing above the line a cornerstone of your personal beliefs as well as your working philosophy. Why? Well, as one of my very good friends and mentors, Pastor Rowan Dredge, who has made a study of this concept of living above the line, as he says in an article written for a book that was put out by an organization called Thought Leaders, he says that being above the line means that both individuals as well as teams can engage more freely, respond more enthusiastically, and contribute more meaningfully to the task at hand. So, how much better would your sales performance be today if you were engaged more freely, and if you were responding more enthusiastically, and if you were contributing more meaningfully, not just to your role, but to the team, to the marketplace, to your organization, to your products, to yourself, to the challenging environment that you operate in, to what it means to be a professional salesperson today. So with that in mind, let's unpack this thing called playing above the line. So as we've already discussed, in the highly competitive and sales work environment, today companies need proactive salespeople who know how to self-manage. What companies need today is they need salespeople who are both proactive and who are willing to take ownership as well as responsibility for their actions. And so these are the empowered people that resolve issues and problems that cross their desk without having to pass blame or deny or make excuses or justifications or even worse, accuse other people or circumstances. Above the line people just get on with the task at hand. It is these resourceful attitudes that we call above the line behavior. And so typically above the line behaviors are those of the self-responsible hero, if you like. And these are characterized by ownership and accountability and responsibility, being positive and proactive. It's about being future-focused, as opposed to, in many organizations, people look to blame someone else when issues and problems arise. So instead of looking to see what they can do to move things forward and achieve a positive outcome, "It's not my fault" is the most common refrain from people who don't want to take responsibility for the situation which they find themselves. And so it's always someone else's fault. And these people operate below the line. And sadly, it's these very same individuals that have not yet arrived in a place in their lives where they understand the concept and the meaning of that old adage, "It's not what happens to us, but rather it's what we do about what happens to us that makes the biggest difference in how things turn out." It's a bit like that old quote, "Things always turn out for the best for those that make the best of the way that things turn out. If it is to be, then it's up to me." In other words, people who work and live above the line get that whilst we cannot control the events that occur in our lives, we can always control our response to those events. So, below the line salespeople are very quick to accept all the credit for their successes. They are also, in turn, just as quick to divest themselves of the responsibility for things that go wrong. And we call these behaviors the behaviors of the victim. These are the below the line behaviors, and these are typically characterized by blame, denial, excuses. People just react, they justify, they point fingers, make accusations, fault finding, and they're always looking back. So things are always better back then. So in order for us to implement an above the line mindset where you operate from a place of ownership and accountability and responsibility and proactivity, we first need to understand the very clear difference between responsibility and accountability. So let me ask you this. What do you think is the difference between accountability and responsibility? And how do you think those differences show up for you? In other words, what is the impact for you in your business when you really take on the responsibility as opposed to just the accountability? I once read a kind of fun way to see the difference. And it said that as an employee, if you're not really sure of what it is that you're being held accountable for, then you might want to take responsibility for finding out. You get that? I'll just repeat that. So let's just say that you as an employee have been hired on, and let's just say you aren't clear of what it is that you are being held accountable for. You might want to take responsibility for finding out. So typically in the world of business, we're pretty loose about how we use our language of responsibility and accountability. And as a result, this has a big impact on why, even though we've actually been assigned the accountability for sales results, or for a sales territory, or for a customer base, why is it that we haven't really taken ownership for them? The fact of the matter is this, that in the majority of cases, whilst we've accepted the accountability, we haven't really picked up the responsibility. We haven't really owned it. So, as an example of this, right now, you approach your manager every day with issues and problems. Okay, maybe it's not every day, maybe it's every second day, every third day, or once a week. And over time, you've become a master, albeit subconsciously, of handing over those issues and those problems to your manager. And in so many cases, they just accept it with open arms. So things like, hey boss, we have a problem with XYZ product not being in stock. And so just as easy as that, using one little pronoun, using we instead of I, we've handed the ball over to them. It's now my manager's problem. It's now my manager's issue. He or she has to come back to me with a solution. How easy was that? We just took the issue and handed it to the manager, and they just sucked it up. So, the first thing we need to understand is who has the problem? You do. It's actually your problem. Look at it this way. Whose sales numbers are they? They are your sales numbers. Whose sales numbers are being impacted by this problem? Your sales numbers. Sure, the impact of those product issues will ultimately affect your manager or the organization that you work for. But all too often we pass them the ball without really accepting responsibility. It's not my fault. It's not my problem. Why should I be held responsible? And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe it isn't your problem. Maybe it isn't your customer. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for the number. You are responsible to get the issue sorted because you are being paid for the sales. You are being paid to achieve that sales result. That means that it's your responsibility. Think about this another way. I've no doubt that your manager has more than enough on his or her plate to do without doing your work for you. At the end of the day, whose outcomes are they? Yours or your manager's? And if we're really honest with ourselves, we have to put up our hand and say, these are my goals, these are my sales, these are my outcomes. The bottom line is, we need to accept responsibility rather than blame others for our situation, regardless of what's wrong with our lives. And it's interesting that most of us spend a good portion of our time blaming others or blaming the system for whatever situation we happen to find ourselves in. One of the best ways actually to be happy and enjoy your career and experience success in your life is not to blame the system or to blame others for the situation that you're in. Instead, is to accept full responsibility for where you are today, because by accepting responsibility, you are much more likely to make better decisions that will lead you to greater success in the future. Pick up the morning newspaper and read, and every morning you'll see numerous stories of criminals and swindlers and others who are accused of various different bad things. And isn't it just typical that in the same story over and over and over again, the accused person always seems to blame someone else for what happened? If the company's going bankrupt and people are losing their jobs, many people choose to blame the CEO and the board of directors. If someone loses a job for stealing from their employer, often the guilty party blame the company for not paying them enough or for tempting them by making something easy to steal. If someone is in a bad relationship, often he or she will blame the other person for saying this or that. The sad fact is that we all seek to place blame and accountability onto others. If we're having problems in our careers, we look for scapegoats. In the 1980s, there was a story about the serial killer Ted Bundy coming out to the press just days before his execution, saying that he believed that he'd committed his criminal acts because he'd looked at pornographic magazines. So, apparently, Bundy hoped that this revelation would absolve him of the responsibility for brutally killing countless women. And so, while this may seem like an extreme example, we do this ourselves, albeit in smaller ways. We do this all the time. There are those times where we seek to blame others for things that we do or that we don't like about ourselves or our lives, instead of really looking at ourselves in the mirror and facing the responsibility for our issues. It's so much easier for us to fix the system and fix others than really to get in and fix ourselves. We look to blame our boss, we look to blame our ex-spouses, our co-workers, our customers, a myriad of others for any number of things. The question is it really true that others can contribute to the negative situations we face? Of course they play a role. However, holding others entirely responsible for our condition only serves to disempower us. What it does is it places the power over our own lives and conditions into the hands of someone else. We should always believe that our lives are under our own control, not the control of someone else. So yes, I'm not saying that this is easy doctrine to follow. It's just the most healthy and mature way to go about living your life. Because, as I said earlier, one of the very, very best ways to be happy and enjoy your job and experience true success in your life is not to blame the system or others for your current situation that you're in. Instead, it really comes down to accepting full responsibility for where you are today. Because when you accept complete responsibility, you're much more likely to make far better decisions, and these decisions will lead you to much greater success in the future. So let me give you an example. Was it your fault that the global financial crisis hit, and as a result, people don't want to see you because they don't want to be spending any money? No. All right, well, let me ask you a question. Are there some people somewhere in the world currently right now making sales in your industry? Of course, absolutely. So the question is, The only reason you're not is because you don't know how. Let's face it, if you knew how, would you be doing so? If you knew how to sell, even in this very, very tight economy, would you? Of course you would. So the reason you're not selling is because you don't know how. If you knew how to sell your products as they are, with all their shortfalls, with all the price increases, with everything that goes with it, if you knew how to do it, would you? Of course you would. So why aren't you? Because you don't know how. Whose responsibility is that? If you knew better, would you do better? Yes. Therefore, whose responsibility is it to make yourself better? Yours. You are responsible. So whilst there's no question that the global financial crisis has created a whole new set of challenges that you need to now face, they are your challenges that you need to face. So all of that being said, let's now go back to the concept of accountability and responsibility so that you can clearly understand the differences and apply them to yourself, to your business. So, whereas accountability is being held to the consequences of an outcome by an external force or person, in other words, someone or something is holding you to account for the outcome of, say, a project or the solution to a problem or fulfillment of an assignment. Responsibility, on the other hand, is all about ownership of the endeavor. In other words, owning the project, owning the problem, owning the assignment. So let me give you an extreme example of this. Somebody puts a gun to your head and says, I need you to do A, B, C, or D. That is an external force holding you accountable for A, B, C, or D. Whereas responsibility says that I own it. It says that I'm doing this on my own accord, on my own volition. There is no gun to my head. I'm doing it so that I can fulfill those outcomes. I'm doing it for myself. And so to be responsible means to not only have a great concern for the outcome of the action, but it also means that one has a very clear sense of obligation for doing the action or bringing that project or action to fruition. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Have you truly accepted responsibility for your territory, for your customers, for your sales budget, for your quotas? Have you honestly accepted responsibility for that accountability that has been placed on you? Do you own it? Have you actually stepped up? Have you actually said, this is mine and I will do whatever it takes to get the job done? This is the big difference between accountability and responsibility. And so, whilst accountability can be delegated to you, responsibility can never be delegated because that must come from you. Because in truth, it doesn't matter what you're supposed to be accountable for. What matters is whether one feels a sense of ownership. So if a person's sense of responsibility is smaller than their accountabilities, then the accountabilities will always suffer. So the key point then for accountability is that it is something that is external to the individual. So as we said, I can hold you account for a process, an operation, or a result, whereas really on the other hand, responsibility says that, hey, if I drop the ball, I am willing to pick it back up. When I make a mistake, I own that mistake. I am willing to fix it. It's my obligation to act. The fact is that for most of us to be fully engaged, not only at work, but in our lives in general, we need to feel a true sense of ownership for our lives and our work. And if we don't, that's when the problems arise. So picking up the ball and taking ownership and responsibility is the foundation of having an empowered team that lives and plays above the line. So right now, I want to take a look at what is called the 5 stages of responsibility. So starting with the earlier stages where we do whatever we can to avoid taking on the responsibility. to the final stages when we actually pick up the ball and run with it. So imagine a 5-rung ladder, and the bottom rung of the ladder is really your stage 1, where we totally avoid responsibility, and what we want to do is climb up each rung of the ladder, and as we climb up each rung, we start to take on more and more ownership. In most organizations, and really, as I said, in life in general, when something goes wrong, typically all human beings start off at the first stage of responsibility avoidance, where we blame someone else for the problem. So obviously, when someone else is to blame, then we can't fix it. And if we can't fix it, then we can't be held accountable. So take a look around the sales team that you're a part of. Take a look around your office, your organization. If there is a lot of blame, if there's a lot of pointing fingers, you know you're really at the first stage of taking on responsibility. The next rung of the ladder, stage 2 of moving people towards ownership and responsibility, is when we justify. And we justify the reasons why these things have happened. So the weather was bad, I couldn't start the car, I got caught in traffic, my dog ate my homework. These are all viable reasons and excuses for why I could do nothing about it. And so once again, we refuse to see how we could have changed what happened or what we could do to fix things. And in this way, we avoid ownership. We avoid having to be held accountable. In other words, it's not my fault. You know, the referee was biased, or there was something wrong with the tools, or it's logistics' fault. There was nothing I could do about it. It was the customer. It was the competition. It was the fact that our products aren't good. It's all these excuses. So again, as a team, ask yourself, how much time do we invest justifying why we do certain things? And the obvious point here is, as long as I'm caught up in excuses and justifications, I'm never going to be focused on the solution, on what I need to do to move this thing forward. Now, the third rung of the ladder, moving towards accepting responsibility, is when we admit that we might have been at fault. So at this point, we tend to feel maybe a sense of shame, and this is the third stage, when we feel that sense of shame for what it is we either did or didn't do. However, even though we may feel shame for what happened, we still have not yet gotten to the point where we can learn from the situation and change our response for the future. There is still that sense of victimness, the woe is me, poor me, hoping that someone else is going to come to my rescue, or someone else is going to absolve me from my accountability. And again, take a look around your team. Take a look around your office. Take a look around your organization. Are we at a stage 3 of accepting responsibility? Stage 4 is when it starts to move towards above the line behavior. And this is where you begin to move beyond shame and are more consumed by their sense of obligation. In other words, you or people around you say things like, I have to finish this report by Monday. I have to get back to the client by the end of the day. I have to do this, I've got to do that. There's no I choose to, it's all about I have an obligation to. And so as the famous American painter Milton Avery once said, that when we act out of a sense of obligation, our level of performance in fulfilling our task is barely adequate to get a pass. However, the good news is that at least when you begin to feel that sense of obligation, things will begin to get done. Now, the place that ultimately you want to get to is stage 5. And this is where you move beyond obligation to ownership. This is where you own your decisions, you own your actions, you own your outcomes. And at this point, when we fully own our decisions and our actions, we're able to engage in clear and resourceful thinking, which allows us to really solve problems. When we live and when you work above the line, there's no question that that can be demanding. However, it's also incredibly liberating and empowering, because living and working above the line puts the locus of control squarely in our hands. It means that we gain control over our lives because we recognize that we are responsible for both our choices and our actions. And in other words, if our current actions are not achieving the results we're looking for, we get to choose a different response. So for things to get better, we need to get better. For things to change, we need to change. We need to work, we need to live, we need to play above the line.